Hi everyone, we're back with part 2 of lecture number 9 on the French Revolution. We left off with an explanation of the increasingly dire situation of many in France who were laboring under not only a lack of food, but heavy taxes as well as extreme repression and censorship. In the spring of 1789, the Estates General was called. This is the representative body in France. Now, it had been in existence for hundreds of years, but had not been called very much in recent decades, given the absolutist push of monarchs such as Louis XIV and Louis XVI. But things are reaching crisis proportions, so Louis XVI will call the Estates General to meet to try to problem solve. The Estates General consisted of representatives from the Roman Catholic Church. The clergy sent representatives to this political body. The aristocracy, or the nobility, also had people that were seated in this assembly representing their interest. And then the bourgeoisie, the middle class, and the commoners, they also had representation in this assembly. Now, what we'll see is that very quickly fireworks will begin between King Louis XVI and the Estates General, when he refused to agree with the bourgeoisie's demand that all three meet as a single body, not as separate groups within the Estates General. They decided to simply secede and declare itself the National Assembly. So now this can get confusing, so I'll go very slow with it. The National Assembly is what's formed from the bourgeoisie, from the Estates General. They're going to peel off and form their own independent assembly, known as the National Assembly. Now, why would they do this? These members of the Third Estate, these commoners and middle-class French citizens, why would they do this? Why would they withdraw? Well, it could be because their interests were quite different than that of the clergy and the aristocracy. At a fundamental level, the representatives of the Roman Catholic Church and the nobility in France were perfectly fine with the status quo. You know, they weren't taxed. They were held in very high esteem. They tended to dominate many positions of authority in France. In other words, they didn't see the urgent problems that the Third Estate was seeing, right? These members of the middle class and the common class. They weren't the ones that were starving to death, in other words. And not only that, but the bourgeoisie and the commoners, the common people, they represent the majority of the population. I mean, they far outstrip by numbers the members of the clergy and the aristocracy. So they feel like their voice is just being drowned out in the Estates General, that they need to strike out on their own, create their own assembly to really address the needs of the common man. And one of their biggest pushes will be for the establishment of a constitutional monarchy. Now, eventually the National Assembly will add to it the clergy and aristocracy. Eventually the king will give in and these two groups will join the National Assembly. And as a body, they will all agree that it is time for France to embrace a constitution, a set of laws defending the rights of individual citizens. Now, they don't want to do away with Louis XVI's rule, but they want to create a monarchy that is based in a constitution, right? That there needs to be some basic defense, legal defense of citizens' rights. Now, while all of this may sound reasonable to us, it did not sound reasonable to King Louis XVI. He begins calling up an army of about 18,000 troops to march on Versailles with his plan to exercise his divine right. Remember, he thinks he shouldn't be sharing power with anyone, and he's not a fan of having to abide by a constitution. And when news gets out that the king has now turned against the National Assembly, we will see a momentous event take place. On July 14th, 1789, the poor will take to the streets of Paris in desperation. Remember, they have no rights, they have no food. The situation is not being addressed by their king. While the politicians debated, the poor took action, attacking the Bastille, which was a medieval fortress turned prison in the center of Paris. Why did they storm this particular structure? Well, they were looking for gunpowder. And as French troops in service of the king tried to defend the Bastille, the crowd really started to become enraged. The garrison was surrounded. The crowd took the commander and beheaded him. They then turned the city over to the Marquis de Lafayette, a hero of the American Revolution. The king's troops went home, and the National Assembly was allowed to continue meeting. This event is considered the beginning of the French Revolution. So the National Assembly will continue working on drafting a constitution to defend the rights of French citizens. And initially, they were fine with letting the king remain as the head of the state. He would still control the army and navy. He would still direct foreign policy. But much of the authority over internal affairs would now be in the hands of a single body called the Legislative Assembly. This, again, unacceptable from the standpoint of King Louis XVI. It was his great-grandfather, after all, that had pioneered the notion of absolutist rule based upon divine right theory. So he decides to kind of bug out. He fled Paris with the ultimate goal of going to another nation to rally supporters and then return to seize total control. This is in 1791. When the French population found out, though, that he was trying to escape, he was captured near the Belgian border, taken back in custody, and now kept under armed guard. While he apologized, the people were losing their trust in the king. Here's where the revolution starts to become much more radicalized. And in the background of all of this, we're going to see warfare break out. Not warfare between the French, not yet, although that's coming. We're going to see several foreign powers. We're going to see Prussia and Austria invading France in the spring of 1792. Why were these neighboring countries so interested in what was going on within France? Well, they considered all of this French talk of freedom and equality dangerous to their countries. In other words, that if this French Revolution kept going, that it might start to cross national borders, and that before long, Austria and Prussia might find their own revolutions. So what we're going to see is that the National Convention, a new assembly, you don't have to keep up with this, I promise. I'm not going to test you on the different names for these assemblies. But now a new assembly called the National Convention took office in September of 1792. They felt like that their king was secretly communicating with Austria and Prussia, inviting them to invade. By the way, there is some evidence that he did do that. So they think that their king is selling them out, that he's not interested in their welfare, and they're going to ultimately convict him, put him on trial and convict him of treason. On January 21st, 1793, their king, Louis XVI, was taken to the guillotine and beheaded. 10 months later, his wife, Marie Antoinette, met the same fate. Yet at the same time the French were killing their king, the revolutionary government had internal concerns, facing a revolt of peasants who remained loyal to the monarchy and the church. In other words, there were still some elements within France that still believed in the idea of a monarchy. And they are deeply concerned to see that their king has been killed. They are even more concerned to see that some elements of the revolution are bent on attacking the nobility as well as the Roman Catholic Church. This is not part of what they signed up to do, in other words. What we will see is that before long, the revolution kind of starts to turn in on itself. You have those that want to defend the monarchy and defend the Roman Catholic Church, and then you have other groups saying, no, these are symbols of oppression. We need to get rid of the nobility and class distinctions. We need to get rid of a monarchy. We need to spread freedom to everyone. As internal riots and rebellions begin stepping up, in response, in April of 1793, the National Convention will create what becomes known as the Committee of Public Safety. And if ever there was a thing that was misnamed, it is this, because the Committee of Public Safety will end up turning on the population of its own country and committing mass executions. The most influential member of this 12-person committee was Maximilien Robespierre. Robespierre and the committee began targeting anyone who dared question their authority as an enemy of the revolution. They instituted what became known as the Reign of Terror, a period in which they ordered political assassinations against a wide range of people perceived to be enemies of the French Revolution. Most of these murders were ordered by Robespierre himself. They also began a vigorous de-Christianization program in France, believing that the Roman Catholic Church and Christianity represented tools of oppression. Historians believe that an estimated 40,000 people went to their death during the French Revolution at the hands of their own government during the Reign of Terror, while another 300,000 people were imprisoned during wave after wave of political violence. Everyone became paranoid that they would be singled out next, neighbor turning against neighbor during this Reign of Terror. Eventually, however, people get tired of living in fear, and Robespierre ultimately will have to take some of his own medicine. The National Convention ultimately turned against him. He will be put on trial for treason and will be guillotined. As if this wasn't enough upheaval, the French revolutionary government was also having to deal with the issue of war with other European powers. In order to fight off their neighbors, French officials needed to build an army, so they instituted universal conscription, a draft. They also had to deal with what sort of government are we going to have now that we have no king. The National Convention came up with a new constitution that created the so-called Directory. And the man chosen to lead this new government in the next stage of the French Revolution will be Napoleon Bonaparte. Bonaparte had earned his reputation by defeating a number of France's opponents in the ongoing war that was taking place as a backdrop to the French Revolution. And with a coup that took place in 1799, the revolution effectively was over. Napoleon will wrest power away from the Directory and will essentially become the first emperor of France. He will be aided in this by the French army, which was loyal to him, that had fought alongside him for years. We'll see several reforms under his rule. Napoleon decided, for example, it was time to make peace with the Roman Catholic Church. He will sign the Concordat in 1801, in which the French government would no longer intercede in the affairs of the Roman Catholic Church. They will allow churches to reopen. The Pope will once more gain control of the Papal States. This immediately appeases the mass of the peasantry that were never fans of attacking the church to begin with. Napoleon will also help to rewrite the laws of France. The Code Napoleon will be published in 1804. This new streamlined set of laws incorporated Enlightenment principles such as religious toleration and the elimination of class privileges. It also took steps to protect private property and individual rights, and the Code Napoleon will come to be used and applied in French colonies around the world. Napoleon continued to engage in a series of wars against countries in Europe, defeating the Austrians, the Prussians, and the Russian armies. He also conquered Spain. As such, he became the virtual ruler of much of Western Europe, not just his home country of France, forcing the Russian Tsar Alexander I into an alliance. He could not, however, beat the British due to their overwhelming control of the seas. Their navy was dominant. Napoleon's ultimate downfall, though, took place in 1812 when he made the fateful decision to invade the Russian Empire. Take a look at the map. This is a massive empire to the east. It's also quite cold, and the climate is forbidding in this region. And while he began his invasion during the summer, the Russians just continued to retreat further and further, so his army was forced to chase them deeper and deeper into Russian territory, and before long it was wintertime in Russia. And the winter of 1812 was an especially cruel one. Many soldiers died of hypothermia and exposure. To give you an idea, out of an army of 600,000 men that followed Napoleon into Russia, less than 10,000 returned. Napoleon was forced to abdicate or turn over his rule in France in 1814. He will try to make a reappearance in France in 1815, but that too will fail. This is the end of the French Revolution and the period under Napoleon's rule. We'll pick up with France as it returns to its monarchy a little bit later on in this class.